Intellectual stew. Intellectual stew with James Kirkland.
Powerful and provocative. Prophetic and practical.
Intellectual stew.
Informative and inspirational. How you gonna do better if you don't know what better looks like? I do.
Intellectual stew.
Come on, let's talk about it with me, the mind massager.
Intellectual stew with James Kirkland.
Episode of the Intellectual Stew with James Kirkland, and I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. And we do have a very, very special guest with us tonight by the name of Miss Kanika. Miss Kanika Bloom. Say hello to our listeners.
Hi, everyone.
All right. And tonight, if you looked at our topic, we're talking about eyewitness accounts of miseducation from through the eyes of an educator. So do me a favor, if you know a teacher, tag that teacher, any parent that has children that are in school, more specifically in special education and in those areas, please tag those individuals. We're going to hopefully start a series of conversations that's going to deal with the miseducation of a lot of our children. Let me tell you, I want you to also go to our website at some point, www.theintellectualstew.com, www.theintellectualstew.com. Disco, we left stew off the end of the intellectual on that on the website. It's intellectualstew.com. Our phone number, if you want to call in and participate in the conversation in a few moments, is 678-638-6626, 638-6626, and we will get this conversation going. So do me a favor, Tiffany, tell our listeners, while you get your stuff together, that's okay. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, first, thank you for using my name, Tiffany.
Oh, my bad. Miss Kanika. Kanika. I apologize.
No, but I do. I use Kanika. Yes, my name is Tiffany. But just to tell a little bit about myself, first of all, I want to thank you for creating this platform. I would say that myself and anyone else who is in education, most people that I know, my peers, are really passionate about our subject in regards to our students. And I think just from any parent would be concerned because we know our kids are our future. I know it sounds cliche. Just to give a little background about myself, I've been in education a little bit under 20 years. Well, I actually can say I was born into this. Okay. My parents are both educators. My father is a retired teacher, coach, principal. My mother is a retired teacher and social worker. So I kind of had the uniqueness of growing up in a household with parents who, my dad was strong in science and math, and my mom was strong in social studies and reading, and they were very intentional with us. With making their life work about social service people in education. So we tutored before we taught. Mm-hmm. My siblings are also in the field of education. So if I were just to say my background, I finished college. I won't date myself, but in the early 2000s, okay. I did my master's in 2007 in special education. And so I've spent most of my life work in dealing with students who are in that demographic as far as being special needs students, as well as working in an urban area. So okay. That's been my background. I've worked in public sector, private sector, as well as in charter schools. So been around in that way.
Did you spend the bulk of your time working with special? When you say special education, does that include special needs?
Okay, yes. So,
Okay.
categorize the students with disabilities. There's 13 categories. I think when we were younger, we thought, special education meant students who had learning disabilities. There's 13 categories. There are students who may have autism, students who may have deaf or blindness. A lot of my work has been with students who have had more issues traditionally with emotional capacities. We used to call that, we would say behavior disorder, but it's more of emotional disorder. Because of the areas in which I taught, I was more in the urban area. A lot of times that's our children. And a lot of that had a lot to do with just helping students to have a least restrictive environment for their learning and giving them replacement skills. Right. So a child is going to feel, but just a role of educators to help a child to know how to appropriate responses to some of the feelings that they're having. So that's been a bulk of my life.
Gotcha. Let me ask you this, because it's in I used to substitute teach back in the day when I came out of college and all those types of things. I was in high school. Well, I did high school, and I think I did elementary. I did middle school a few times. Which one did you work with the most?
People will laugh and people will say, "Who wants to do it?" But middle school has always been my specialty and my strength. I know. When I came out of school, I know some people don't believe I was young once upon a time, but I used to be very, very young. And just coming out of school in your 20s, high school is a challenge. For some people, they may feel like they can relate to those scholars, but I think sometimes there's just not enough level of respect because they see you more as a peer. And I also just recall, even in being a high school student, that many of our younger teachers, although they were the teachers we loved, they usually weren't hired back.
Wow.
When it came to the younger children, I always said that it takes a special type of person to teach a elementary child. I think there has to be a certain love and care of being a kindergarten or first grade teacher. I also think that sometimes there's a misconception that a younger child means that it's easier. Some people think when we put so much emphasis on behavior, which is the middle school. When I was a child, that was called junior high, right? We started to change that term to middle school, really just to think of that age group. There are statistics, so I agree with all of them, that middle level learning, you have a age where, and you know this just from being a pastor, children, we said our children get wiser and weaker. When children are in that in-between age, usually middle school is from 5th to 8th grade, they are 10, 11 years old, 12 to 15 years old, the consequences change, okay? So if they're elementary, we take the recess, the child feels bad about it. When they're in middle school, they're trying limits, they're at that, if I can say that, smelling themselves age, right? They want
Say what you want to on it. It's not a Christian show.
No, I think but
I'm joking.
I'm just not sure everyone's familiar with that term.
Yeah,
A middle level child is at an age where they're trying limits. They're in that in between. It's like a middle child. They're not a child, and they're not an adult, but they're trying to find out where. So let's see what limits I can push with my teacher. Okay, you're gonna call my mom. Go ahead and call it, even though they're afraid for you to call. And so I just think that's always been my ministry. I have always just loved that age group. I think it's an age group where it's actually, I think my passion for it is their last time of having a reign on them before they have to be independent. And I say that to say, for example, when kids are in kindergarten or 8th grade, we do a lot of guided reading with them. When you get to high school, they pass you a book. So all the skills that you really need to hone to be able to be successful in high school and college, we only have that kindergarten to 8th grade to do it. So I think because it's such a critical time for shaping, that's where I think I was just had the most impact.
Okay, so you said that that's your ministry, and ministry, of course, meets needs. That's the word that term ministry means. So is that why you chose this career? I know you said you were born into it. So sometimes a career can choose you. So did it choose you?
It's interesting.
And you embodied it, or how did that go?
If my parents were watching, they will say, when Kanika was young, she didn't want to go to college. She wanted to go do stand-up comedy, and she wanted to go do things.
They want to see your face.
They want to do things. Sorry, they want to do. I want you to go into the acting field. Sorry about that. I used this.
No, you're good.
And then I also, when I initially left for college, I wanted to go into business finance. So what I wanted to do was educate minorities on financial education.
Okay.
When I was young, I married young, and I was working and trying to balance family and. When I was trying to balance family and balance school, I always trained. So if I went to a job and they said, okay, this is what we're going to do, and they gave me a manual, within a day, I'd be the person teaching the other people who were having their struggles. So when it says it's a ministry, God chose me. No matter if I were to leave this field or not marginalized into a classroom, God has made me a person that is, my ministry is to educate people. And so, yeah.
And and we'll get into some of the creative ways that you've done that over the years. And please, everybody understand, those that are just joining in, we have Miss Kanika Bloom with us tonight. She's an educator who's been in the educational field for over 18 years. A lot of her expertise and specialty has been with special education, and she's going to talk about that more. Listen, we're hoping that this is a platform that leads to a multiplicity of conversations, not just this particular day, because there's so many areas that we need to cover. Now, if you are on line now and you want to see us actually in the studio, go to YouTube, go to DISCO100 Radio and subscribe. As we get a little deeper in this conversation, if you decide you want to call in, the phone number is 678-638-6626. So you've pretty much given us your educational lifeline. Your dad was in science, your mom. So you had it sounds like you were born into this, I was okay growing up. We moved around young. So when I got put in the gifted program, I remember being like in the 4th or 5th grade and being on the 9th grade reading level.
Wow.
I remember being having to stay in the same 6th grade classroom for 2 years because I couldn't be with the other 5th graders because me and a few other people, were on a little bit further along, in that. So I want to talk about that a little bit.
My experience is actually very similar. One thing I would add to that, I also was in a gifted program, so we were kind of in a 4th to 6th grade in one same classroom. I also wanted to add to that on one side where we have special education, traditionally gifted is on the other side of special education. So one of the things about special education in the public school sector is that funding is given to those students with disabilities. Back when I was in the 80s, I'm going to age myself again, a lot of funding was given to...
Tell them all your business.
You told the business.
Okay, my bad.
Okay, so we must all get old. Let's preface it. It's a blessing to be old.
It is.
So I'm be old. So back in the 80s, when I was a student, there was a lot of funding given to gifted students too.
Okay.
And so a lot of things we follow the money. We are seeing less of those exceptional children. The funding stopped a lot for those kids. So we used to see a gifted program. What you were in, mine was called ET, Expanded Thinking. And so the funding was there. And that's one of the unfortunate things that has happened along the way is that people have felt the more emphasis, especially with No Child Left Behind, more emphasis on scholars who have deficiencies rather than what we should be doing with education, which is fostering lifelong inquiry and making students who are successful in college and in their life by also fostering those students who are advanced.
Okay, you're gonna have to break that down. When you start using when you start using SAT words and talking about fostering lifelong, can you break that down for the novices of us who are not as educated and intellectual, please? Thank you.
Now you're making me embarrassed.
No, I'm joking.
So
I'm joking. Okay. That's why you're here, because you're mine. Trust me.
That's why I invited you. I always say this, and I'll say this: people who are smarter than us, who decided how education would look in this country. We know that initially, the educational system, as we know, it was not built for me and you, you and I.
True.
It was not built for It was not built for Black men. It certainly was not designed for women. Our school system was more so for a woman would be for something domestic, right? And so when we started to look at schools, one of the things that we wanted to do is we really have the goal to educate children so that they have the readiness for college. So we want them to be lifelong learners. I think sometimes something we experience in our age group, going back to age, is that really when you meet a person, right? Now, most scholars that I've dealt with that are in special education, their disability is invisible. Okay. So a person who is autistic, or a person who may have ADHD, or a person who has a learning disability, or a person who has difficulty with their emotional capacity, we can't see that by looking at them. Okay. So when we start to look at...
that's good.
Yeah, you can't see them. I always say that. I said, if we saw someone in a wheelchair, we'll slow down for them. But we don't know how we're going to, when we're meeting someone.
Do they term it that when they teach you all to interact with children, or do they term it as invisible disabilities?
I've heard that term, but
or did you make that up?
You know what I was going to say? I'm wondering if I have. I don't know if I made that up, but it's something I guess I've been aware of because in my work in schools, let's say, for example, for a student who has an emotional issue, okay? You go out to a nightclub tonight, you meet someone, you won't know they were in special education. So you really, sometimes you don't know a person until they get angry or until they get into an emotional situation.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is because if we are trying to educate our kids so that they are able to be in an environment and still be able to learn so that they are able to go and obtain a college degree, if we were to say that's everyone's goal should be to be a college degree, then we have to make school an environment in which they can nurture and grow. So if you have a place that for a child that you make an emphasis on behavior, then you cut that child off because that child no longer wants to go to a place where I'm always in trouble, right? They'll find other things. So when I say the life, that part as far as the lifelong learning, as far as the disability being invisible, most disabilities are. You don't know things that have to do with your cognitive learning. You may not know that just by looking at a person. And so those are kind of things that as educators, especially special educators, we have a short time before high school to teach those kids to advocate for themselves, for those people who are not going to see their disabilities.
Okay. So let me ask you this right here. So you are trained, certified to deal with children that are in special education.
I am certified trained. I was born that way, but yes, I am also. And I would say that I was recommended to go. So initially, I was a general education teacher, and I was recommended to do my special ed because that was the area I was starting to work in. That is the area that my heart was geared towards. So even when I was in a general ed classroom, I might have a student who may have an issue with emotional capacity because we started doing inclusion.
Okay.
Which means we want the child, we in essence say we want the child to not feel different. We want to put the child in a classroom where they have access to 8th grade curriculum. Okay. But we don't think about that child because we want them for appearances to be there, how the frustrational level of an 8th grade text would be for a student who has an emotion, who is not able to read that text and also has an emotional.
And that's my question. You being trained to deal with special, a teacher that that's only been deal with general ed, and now she or he has to deal with an individual, an invisible disability. You feel what I'm saying?
I think
so. How is that impacting our school? How is that impacting the punitive, the punishment? How is that impacting the dropout? You know what I mean?
What impact? Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think what I hear you asking is how does that impact? I think for most teachers, there was a time when special education students' scores counted different. So there's something I think that parents or people need to understand that a teacher is evaluated on the growth of their students.
Okay.
So if I'm a general education teacher who has 30 students, Lord, it's not 30, but 30 students in my classroom, then my evaluation, how I'm evaluated as a teacher, is how that child grows, and how their achievement that they've made through that year. When you take 30 of those students and you have 7 of them to be special education students, I watched as I went over the years that it was very frustrating for a general education teacher because they said, well, I'm not trained in special education. Now, I'm going to go realm out. Learning education when it comes to a parent, a child, and a teacher, that's a triad. Okay. So you're a parent. You've had your children here. What's your oldest name? What's his name?
Trey.
Take, for example. When Trey is a 5th grader in school, you may talk to him at the beginning of the year and say, these are your goals. I want you to do well in school. I want you to perform. Make sure you do your homework. And Trey may have the mindset that says, you know what? I want to do well. I want to excel. I'm getting myself prepared for college. I know my goals. And you could have a lousy teacher that doesn't care, that's in her 30th year. And so even though you and the child may have a goal for that student, the teacher may not be on board. Or you could have, and I'm not saying you, but you could have a teacher and a Trey that have a child on board and not have an environment at home where that child is able to grow. So we have those things that occur. So within a classroom, what happened with a lot of teachers was now I'm receiving students on a demographic that I'm not trained to service.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, sadly, the teacher is concerned about how it looks on her evaluation because now I have 7 students that can cause me not to have a job next year.
Wow.
Because those 7 students may be 3 to 4 to 5 grade levels behind. So they do welcome a special education teacher that can push in, but the challenge of a special education teacher is I have 7 students with multiple categories. So I'm pushing into an hour block of English language arts, for example. When I push into that classroom and they're reading a 7th grade level text. I have a scholar here who is on a 3rd grade reading level. So while we're doing the whole group reading, this child cannot read that text individually. I have another child here who just can't sit still.
All in the same class.
I have another child here that if the lights start to flash, can break out into a seizure. So all these different disabilities, and I just wouldn't call them diverse learners. I don't like to use the term they're different learners because we're all different learners.
Okay.
One of the things we do in special education is we make transitional plans, how that child, but we need to do that for minority children because we really have, school is something someone dropped our kids off. We gauge how we think our child is performing in school, but one day when they were 5, you dropped them off and said, this is where you need to be. And the norms and the structure of that school was different from home.
And I want to cut you off because this is good. This is where because I'm talking to, when I do this show, I'm trying to better our community. You see my shirt?
Which way?
This way.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to look at you as just, I know that's how I am.
Gotcha.
But I'm trying to better our community. You see this hashtag, on the path to better. I'm trying to better. I mean, if everybody else picks up some nuggets along the way, that's fine. But now, you just said something key. We drop our children off at 5 years old, and we expect the school to educate them. Now, as an educator, and you said you've worked in all capacities. I mean, we've had conversations where you've even worked in college level, all this stuff. As a parent, and you've raised children, how would you advise parents to be a part of their children's lives?
Right. So,
educational lives, school life. Okay.
All right. So, again, when I was saying,
Sure, Sandra, you can get a T-shirt. You can go to the website and get one, or you can call me. I'm sorry, thank you. I apologize.
You're okay. I want a T-shirt.
I got your shirt here. Your shirt's here.
Oh, I have a shirt.
Yeah,
Let's
your
see
shirt.
it. Let's
What
see
size?
it.
No, I can't ask you what size you wear. Extra small.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. Tell us about. Let's get parents involved. Go ahead.
Medium.
I got you.
All
You're
right.
so funny.
So, we can say all the cliche of getting to know your teacher. First of all, any child that walks into a school, and I'm just going to say this from being a middle school age. A middle school age child walks into school, we tell them, if someone hits you, you tell a teacher. Mom has sent that child in school and said, if someone hits you, what does mom say to do? Hit them back, right? So what you have to know is I'm so sorry, I have to turn this off here. I'm sorry, I'm on live right now. I'm on YouTube. That's my job.
That's cool.
I would thank you. I have my T-shirt. I'm just excited about this. Right.
You got your T-shirt now.
Thank you. All right.
All right, tell us how to be involved.
But what I was going to say was that so you are your child's going to listen to you first. Mm-hmm. They bring their norms and rules to school with them. And so you have a very critical and important job. In my mom's house, you can walk in and you have to take your shoes off at the door. Okay. Where in your mom's house, I may be able to wear my shoes. When you bring your children to school, you have to help them to understand that there are going to be rules and norms that are going to be at that school. But also, you have far more impact and control than I ever have. You have far more impact and control than a principal ever has. Parents run the schools. We have no schools without you, And I think sometimes the misconception is I'm sitting in the school and you need to fall into their rules, or you want to have them bring their rules with them. That can end up being punitive. You have to be very intentional on how you set your children up for learning. A 5-year-old you should be setting goals with them. A lot of the scholars that I end up getting that are pipelined into special education, there are many of them that do not belong in education. Okay. It just comes from a lack of structure and on some things that are going on at home, and sometimes a lack of structure from a very poor educator.
All right.
I'll be the first to say that.
You said that. Now, I told you the story the other day. I was with my family one time, mm-hmm. and we were at a restaurant up in Kennesaw. Okay. And we're in Kennesaw. Demographics is, mostly. You've been to Kennesaw before?
I have not. That's what I said. When you start to tell me that, you have to give me a little bit.
Okay, Kennesaw's more white than black. You know what I mean? It's a lot more. Cobb County up. So it's definitely a different demographic. But we're out at a particular restaurant. We're about to eat. I'm with my 3 children and my ex, and we're sitting there. And I hear it's about a group of 4 white young ladies, probably mid-20s, early to mid-20s. And they were talking about their teaching days. And I heard one of them specifically say, let me get this out, because I know you're going to get passionate. You're going to want to respond fast.
Listen.
Listen.
Do not set me off.
But this is what she said. She said, I got this one little boy, and you can tell he's going to be a little prisoner. And I said, well, thank God he has you. And I'm interrupting their conversation. I'm a black man, yada yada yada, all that kind of stuff. But when she said he's going to be a little prisoner, it set something off in me. And I said, well, thank God he has you. And she said, huh? I said, yeah. I do a little movement called Project Rob. I advocate to them for them little boys you talking about. I said, so for you to say that he's going to be automatically going to be a little prisoner, thank God he has you. And this is my concern. How many teachers think like that? Because no. I mean, I used to Project Rob, and a lot of what I studied was the pipeline from pre-K to prison. And so a lot of schools are built like prisons, you know what I'm saying? Like you said, a lot of the actions in school are punitive, what kind of punishment is going to happen if you do this, yada, 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 all those types of things. How often do you run into those teachers with those mentalities? And I'm not asking you what goes on in the teacher boardrooms and all that. Fix your camera. I know you want to get your thing back together.
Yeah,
get your thing back together. Yeah.
The reason why I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try my best. I want people to know that I do try to behave. Okay. So let me say it in this way. Yeah. I can't, give you a number of teachers, but it is not uncommon that I have had. A lot of it is we have research that would support that and say that. But I really think that the bigger problem why we're seeing things that way, there is a difference between managing a classroom and being punitive. My classroom, my example of a classroom, many of the wonderful peers and educators I work with foster a community because we come from community. Okay, Black people. I grew up in a town where the teachers that I had might be at my church, could know my parents, and so I grew up in a small town. I would call it the most northern town. Everyone's mostly rooted from the south, but raised us in the north. But we grew up with, and we're still pretty much close knit. Everyone in my peer group. What has happened a lot in education with the teachers that we have, when you said you said their age group, we have a lot of educators that have never, not only not had tutelage with children like us, but they don't even have children. And so when you have a person that is looking at teaching as a career, and I can't fault anyone who's teaching, this is my career, but you have a teacher who graduated from college and lives in their dad's basement and has their iPhone that's better than me, and they come to work every day, which is a job every day. And part of, if I could defend them in a sense, is the way that we teach teachers to teach. Okay. So when I was going to school to be a teacher is given an assignment. You're going to go home, you're going to write a lesson plan. Here's the book. You're going to go and you're going to teach a third grade class. You're going to teach this book. You're going to write a lesson plan, and you have 20 adults in the room that are going to pretend to be 6 or 5. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it gives them an unrealistic misconception on what a classroom setting would be like. But you're dealing with people. So whenever I had to do a lesson plan, I would pass out note cards to other students in my classmates, and I would say, when I say this, I want you to say, I gotta go to the bathroom. Or I want you to say, ooh, because the reality is you're dealing with people. And if you don't front load our teachers with a realistic view of a classroom, they're set up to fail. Wow. It doesn't change that there are things other factors. There can be factors that have to do with race. There can be factors that has a lot to do with sexism. You have a lot of teachers who are threatened and intimidated by males. My son was a bigger child. He, bless his heart, he was always he wore my ring size in first grade. Oh wow! Yeah, I call him like my uncle Tim. He's on Blue Road, but he was a big guy, but he was 6 years old. And so when he and another classmate who's also 6 are pushing each other for the first place in line, cognitively they're both 6. Mm-hmm. But if my son stands a head taller than the other child, when he pushes, now they want to nail him to the cross because they're looking at his size. Yeah. They're not looking at, we have to look through, and I think that's something that maybe is a Christian principle or a people principle. And I just won't be remiss. I think it's just something in us as Black people, our hearts that we have. We can see more than just the behavior once on the outside. Mm-hmm. A lot of times I dealt with colleagues that would down parents. Like, all she does is take up for her child. I called her and said, this is what happened. Our children are our currency. For many other races, your car, your home, those things are important. Our people are our most important currency that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So when you call a parent and say, this child is, a parent takes that personal. This person who is an extension of me, you're saying these things about. Okay, number one. Number two, if you don't want, as a teacher, you have to set yourself to a standard. I don't want any of my scholars to end up in prison.
Okay.
So if you don't come with the mindset for a teacher to even say that, because we know what the words are, then you don't have, then she should look back, or shame on her, look back at you. Because you don't have any expectation for the children that are around you. This is more than just a job. Managing people, I even tell some of my middle schoolers, high schoolers that are going to college, I tell them, get a teaching degree. I'm going for sociology, I'm going for psychology. If you can manage people, I'll just give an example. If you're a manager at McDonald's, stay with me, I go. You're a manager at McDonald's and you have an employee that works the schedule from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
That is here on time, 5 to 1, but only gets 50% of herself, versus an employee that works 5 to 1 but can't get there to 5:15 because she has to drop her children off, but she gives you 150%. If we're like schools, we're going to say this person's wrong. The person who's late is punitive. But why can't we as educators adjust that schedule? And that's what a teacher has to do. When you come into an environment, I always would tell teachers, this is their first 8th grade experience. Why are you putting the kid out? Why are you angry with the kids? This is their first, they're in an age of correction. I get upset with adults that show their behind. You know what I mean? To get upset with the child is and I would say, just because I'm in the field of teaching, I'm still a parent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still in the community. Whether it would be I'm at your house and talking with kids. I know you as being a man. My dad's. I know if you see a child that is out of pocket outside of a setting of your own home. We were raised where we turn to that kid and we tell them. Well, we have a time now that our kids are taught they can, we didn't know anything about child abuse, so someone told them. Parents are afraid of kids. Mm-hmm. You won't believe. Parents are afraid of their own children to discipline them.
Really?
Yeah, they're afraid because there can be consequences to disciplining your child. Now, I'm gonna say this. I know we don't want to provoke violence. You ever had a whooping?
Yeah, it's been a while. I had one.
But if you ever, as a child, you ever have one, right? You had a whooping before.
Yeah.
But that's not something that kids know about now. Not saying we have to use violence, but a parent would not be as comfortable using that as a corrective way with our kids. And so sometimes it changes the kids when they're at school, and then we're dealing with a teacher who has not been trained on how to. There's discipline through love, chastise. My father, I had few whoopings. My sisters, if they're listening, they'll say I never had. But my father would talk to me. My father saying he was disappointed with me was worse than any lashing. Yeah. As a matter of fact, he whooped in order. So, all my older sisters got it, and he said, you sit down, I'd fall out, right? Mm-hmm. But disappointing him meant more than if he could whip me and I could keep going. And I think that's what is happening with some of our teachers. They're expecting perfection, not from their children. There's no wiggle room sometimes for a minority child. A child that can't sit down, always out of his seat, give him a classroom job.
But you know what?
Get him up out of his seat.
But you know what? It's funny that you bring that analogy up. Juwanza Kanjufu tells a story about Lil Johnny. And Lil Johnny would go to school every day and wouldn't sit down. The little white teacher said, she told the counselor told the principal. Well, she told the principal told the counselor. Counselor went to Lil Johnny's house. And when she opened the door, Johnny's barely over teenage years opened the door. And when they opened the door, it was only one chair in the house. And the chair was sitting in front of a TV that was on a crate. And grandmama was sitting in that chair. So, of course, the kids didn't sit down because they didn't have any chairs in the house to sit down, which begs to question, how do you effectively teach a child that you don't understand?
I had not heard that story, but I'm glad that I heard that story. One of the things, you will never know all of your children. One of the things I always did in my class, especially when I taught 3rd and 4th grade, is that I allowed children to sit anywhere they could be successful.
Okay.
My elbows are dark because I used to sit on the floor like this. That's how I like to watch TV. Some kids need to have a leg up. We can say, okay, American Classroom, everyone comes in and have a seat. What I did, especially with teaching special education children, because some children need it, they need, as you can see, I can't stay still, right?
Help yourself.
No, I do a lot of movement. But I would urge students to sit where they could be successful, which means if it's on the floor, I would have situations. If I sit next to Mr. Kirkland, I'm going to talk with him. So I'm not going to sit next to him during this activity because I need to be successful. And what happens is kids will say, "Oh, Mrs. Kirkland," because he's a different name. Miss Kirkland, so and so keeps talking. And so the child wants you to make it punitive for the kid who's talking and say, "James, you need to move." But instead it's, "Maria, you need to move where you can be successful." And if we don't teach children things like that, that's why we see things like on public transportation, the Karens of the world, who are now coming and lording themselves over other people because they've been taught in the American classroom, if I'm not comfortable with something, I can tell on that person and make that person change. But this is a place for a free education. This is their experience. If I've given you the option to sit wherever you want to sit to be successful, then why would you let James be a nuance to you, next to you? And so those are the kind of principles we have to think about when we're dealing with children. Everything you do before a child is teaching. Okay. I call myself a diva, right? I used to wear butterflies in my hair, then I started seeing students wearing butterflies. Probably wear red lipstick. So they will watch the things that you're doing, okay? I can't change who I am, but I do have a responsibility to my kids to understand that they are watching everything that I do. Kids come from just over my years, and I can't even tell you how many students I've had. I've heard horror stories that kids are experiencing. Some of the things like what you just named with your little Johnny story, my little Johnnies are students that live with a grandmother, and grandma only gets groceries once a month. She buys school supplies at the beginning of the year. I've experienced kids who only get a haircut when school starts. The next time they get a haircut is going to be at Christmas break.
Wow.
Yeah. So in between that time, they have to go through being, taco meat and all these other things that are being said. But now the teacher is given an assignment and the child needs a folder. Well, grandma bought school supplies at the end of the year. You don't have a folder. Maybe grandma went to buy a folder, but auntie took the folder when she was going to school. But now the child doesn't have the materials that they need, and we're making that punitive. But as a teacher, the folder was a nickel. Why can't we just ask, especially in middle school? Kids are, two things kids know. They know how to ask for what they need or demand what they need, and they know who care about them. And so as a teacher, as an educator, as a person dealing with children, as a parent, as a person in the community, as any person who has the luxury or the blessing of being around a young person, especially in our age group, you have a responsibility to that child next to you. So ask the child what they need. Instead of making this, oh, well, they just don't have it. And, every time she comes, she doesn't have her things in class. Hold on a second. Probably the worst thing I ever I'm gonna share. One of the worst things I ever did in a school, my daughter, if she's watching, she'll attest to this, but my daughter was in a school and she went to an office to ask if she could make a phone call to call me one day. And one of the secretaries said, "Sure, go ahead and make a phone call." And the other secretary said, "No, she always comes down here, she can't." And she started just to yell at my child. My child's a middle schooler. My child. She gets toe to toe with this adult. That behavior, I have to deal with that behavior of her being disrespectful to an adult. Well, I was told by another security guard in the building, like the way that teacher has spoke to your child, I felt the need to tell you because my daughter was actually provoked. Okay. She's a child, 12, coming to call her mother. And probably the worst thing I ever did was I came to school because we're always teaching, and I came to the office and I said, "Can I see Mrs. So-and-so?" And I walked right behind her desk and I talked to her in the exact same fashion before her peers that she spoke to my child. And she died a million deaths. But the way you spoke and humiliate this is a child. Yeah. We have to be careful with children. And they have to be treated with care.
And I think there's a way, I couldn't think of a good adjective to describe. I think there's a way to stand up for your children. And I think you should stand up for your children because we listen sometimes for parents, especially those that aren't as involved in their children's lives. I think the teacher's word is the end all be all. The reason I say that, because when Trey was about in the fourth grade, maybe fourth grade, my ex used to go options. That's what why mama does that. And so she would come home and she would talk about Trey talks too much in class. And Trey's moving around and Trey's doing this and Trey's doing that. And I said, well, hell, he don't even do that at home. He don't even talk at home. So how is he talking so much in school? I said, can I go next time? So next time I went to the parent teacher conference and she went on with Trey does this and Trey does that and Trey does this and Trey does that and Trey does this. And I said, man, let me ask you a question. This was a black teacher. I said, let me ask you a question. She said, what's that? I said, sound like everything that he's doing now are things that are going to make him successful in the future. She said, oh. I said, no, let's stop. I said, because he can communicate effectively. He's finishing his work. I went down a litany of things he's done. And she said, you're right. I said, maybe you're not giving him enough work. Maybe he's finishing his work fast. I said, I remember me. I could take a 20-question multiple choice test in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. You give it to other people, they're going to take 30 minutes. I'm going to give you an example. I did the insurance exam. Mm-hmm. It was 150 questions. I think it was 20. They gave us 2 hours. I was through in 30 minutes. Gone. I had checked my answer because I'm good at tests. You see what I'm saying? My children were the same way. So if he didn't have anything to do, I said, now maybe you don't understand. I said, let me tell you who his daddy is. His dad is a salesperson. His dad is a preacher. His dad is this. So she said, you know what? I'm sorry. I had him misjudged. And they became best friends.
But you know what you just did? You advocated for your child.
Okay.
So first, let me commend you. I'll just ask, how did your son end up doing in school overall?
Oh, straight. He'll be finishing up his master's degree, and he got 2 more classes. He finished on the president's list through Jacksonville State. I'm put it like this. I brag on that boy so much because his junior year.
Let me brag on you.
I will. Give me a minute. Let me brag on first.
What I was going to say about
I did a good job.
The reason why I said that is because you did something by advocating. Oh, there you go. Here you go. But I say that to say you advocated for your children. Sadly, I've experienced where you have a child at home that can hook up the television, do the fire stick, can play a game, we have kids who are going home, getting their siblings home, cooking their meals, and just really running a house.
But they don't give them a grade for that.
At 11 and 12 years old.
Yeah.
And they're the smartest child in the house.
Yeah.
And then they go to a teacher conference and some lady that looks like me goes up and tells you how dumb your child is.
Yeah.
This, and you turn on the baby.
Yeah.
The parent turns on the baby.
Yeah.
And then they say, oh, well, he needs this reading book, he needs this, he needs that. And why is it that see, my dad would make us read. There's no way that someone outside the house, but the reason why you went to advocate for him is because you knew your child.
Mm-hmm.
Your teacher should not be telling you who your child is. You should know your child.
Exactly.
You can't tell me my child's reading ability. I should know my child's reading ability.
Okay. And
I should be working with you as a teacher and say, this is what they're doing. The other thing is, we as parents, and one of the questions you asked me at the top was, what is the advice I would give a parent? Mm-hmm. You can't rely on the school 100% to educate your children.
Okay.
Just because you go to church every Sunday doesn't mean you're going to heaven. There's some work you have to do on yourself. There's some work you have to do with your children. It's wonderful that your kids can attend a public school. It's a bonus if you have the funding to put them in a private school, if you can put them in the best schools. But they are learning from you. You have a responsibility. That's the only thing I'm going to say. You have a responsibility in educating your children too. But
you see some of the posts of some of our friends.
Not.
They're not. They can't even spell the correct there and there. Well, I'm not trying, and I'm not trying to point the finger, but you understand what I'm saying.
And here's the deal too.
Okay.
And then we can learn from our kids.
Okay.
I just want to say something. And I'm going to say this because you and I are a lot alike, and it's something I didn't really pay as much attention to until I've gotten older. When you've had an education like you and I have had an education in which we were gifted children, I was identified in first grade as having being gifted. They call me egghead. I had a genius IQ. I was bright. I had parents who were educators, and I was joking with my friend the other day. When we played school, black kids, when we played any game, we whoop, right? So my sisters taught me to, I could do multiplication when I went to first. But a lot of it's because we played school and they beat me up to do it. But some of it is just, I was naturally, my parents are 30 years older than me. So I grew up, my siblings are 11, 12, 8, 9. I grew up with I'm the youngest, 27th grandchild, 7th child. So I was always around older people. So I was much older than my peers. I still never really relate as much with my peer group. But I had an older soul and there were things that I knew and understood. When I was in first grade, I finished all the first grade books. I went to second grade to finish those books. I was in the third, fourth grade split, and I went in a gifted program.
Mm-hmm.
Our pathway of education is very different than a lot of our peers. So when you look and see a parent who is spelling words incorrectly there, and there, and we do have a brain. I used to have this red pin in my head. Cringe when I see those type of things. Oh, you got a call.
You got a call in, okay. Let's see what we got here.
Oh,
guess they hung up.
Frank caller. No, good. They're gonna call right back. What I was gonna say is I used to have that critical eye. But what I started, that's part of my heart of being a special education teacher. What I understood is that there are people who graduated high school who can't sign their own name.
Yeah.
We were put on a different pathway. So I'm not going to judge. There's some people who had to work, in some countries, the child who's in school is a lazy kid and the other kid is a working kid.
Okay.
Many of the adults that I tutored that worked on their job for 16, 17 years, who now have to take a test to keep their job. So straight out of high school, they went into this factory, they worked there. Now they know that they can pay, they can pay two young people, they can split their salary in half.
Mm-hmm.
So to have to fight for your own job because you don't know there, and you've been doing your job for 18 years, but now someone is going to have you 18 years into your career take a test to keep your job. That's the kind of things that have been happening to people in our age group. Okay. So when we see those things, I'll never look at a parent and say they're not equipped to do. Kids don't care anything about that. You know what? They don't have a pen and they're not writing there either. And so, and not to down you on saying that, but to say
man.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say.
Okay.
I don't put a judgment on someone by their spelling or reading or and say what they're able to do with their children, because some people just had to work.
Gotcha.
And some people also were were in school and someone didn't advocate like you did for Trey or your parents did for you, and someone just allowed them to go through without that. And they made it this far without being able to spell it. So that's the only thing I wanted to say.
No doubt. And please, listeners, I am not downing anybody by saying that the question, that the beyond the comma, it wasn't quite a period yet. But if I'd have gotten beyond the comma, that question, I would have said, how do you supplement if you know that that's the situation you're in? What kind of environment?
You're speaking to what the parents do.
Yes, we're talking about. Remember, we're advising parents.
Gotcha.
All right, we got another caller. We're gonna see who this is. Thank you for calling the Intellectual Stew. Caller, tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Well, hi, good evening. My name is Letty.
Okay.
And I am so enjoying this conversation tonight and your guest speaker. I am in education, and I have experienced some of the situations that your speaker is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much, Mrs. Bloom, for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with us. I wanted to ask a question about the various intelligences. So for many years, we've taught that there are, the three intelligences, like visual learners, auditory learners,
mm-hmm.
and kinesthetic learners.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking that because we know that there are, at least 9 now. So in your experience, Ms. Blooms, what do you think, what kind of job do you think we're doing in the education system as far as identifying the other experiences?
If I can be candid, I would say I have experience that we're doing a poor. We have the awareness of it, but I think we do a poor job of it because one of the things we were discussing off was about how we're making reading and math. We put an emphasis in teaching to the test. We put so much emphasis on evaluations, and we want to make these monolithic classrooms. We want to fit children into a mold instead of seeing their individual ways in which they learn. I've been in schools in the beginning of the year, we give them a test and we find out, and a child will say they're more visual, but then we only take that data and we set it to the side. And as a teacher, they continue to make lesson plans in that way. I pride myself, as well as some of the educators that I've been blessed to know, of being a whole child teacher. So in one classroom, I may, in teaching one lesson, be throwing a ball across from another one. We're going to do stuff because I realize that we have all of these minds at one time learning. And I think what we do a lot of times, because we want to do it safe, so we want to say, okay, I'm aware that it's there. So we scratch that off the box that we did it, but then we don't incorporate that into our daily lesson. I think that's something that we sincerely We have to have enough of the right people be concerned enough about our children, and that's one of the things I'm going to say. And I'm Miss Lady, I know you said you're an educator. I'm not sure. Are you a parent also? May I ask? Are you still there? She's still
Miss Letty, are you still there?
not sure if her call went
Hey,
out.
if you're not there, call back and if you don't mind, because you can stay on the conversation for a
Yep.
minute. We're gonna have a little dialogue with you if you're still listening. 678-638-6626, and I want you to dialogue
Yep,
with Miss Kanika.
because the last thing I was going to say is my push for parents is make greater demands on your schools. Find out who your child is. See, your school is there to service you. So we have a certain demographic. We have to have that same a certain number of those teachers. Parents have to make those demands on their school. My child learns this way. As verbal as I am, remember when you said about that comma? When I was 5, I remember my mom was our school. I went to a nursery school. They told her that I was quiet, withdrawn, didn't talk, and I mean I would sing. I could talk to anyone. And my mother took a day off of work and came to school with me. Mm-hmm. And I remember her saying, I'm giving another new name. What I want to use Paula. I can use any name I want. Huh? She was, Paula can read. Mm-hmm. So when you have me come sit on the carpet and sing This Old Man, I was bored because I had already, I was reading, I was already doing math. But my mother had to take that day off work and come into that classroom and then teach a teacher how to deal with me. Wow. And it's our responsibility. That's what we're paid to do. Wow. And some people may say teaching is easy. People may think, I will say salaries may have caught up some, but it is a very difficult job. And it takes a great person to do it. So we have to have people who are willing to do the work. And you have to have a love and a compassion for children, young people, and your future. I know we cliche say our kids are our future. The same people that we're around, we have to get old. We're getting old. You're going to be older than me first. I want to make sure I just say but you're much, but
I'm good for my age though.
What I'm going to say about that is that we have a responsibility because those are the people that are going to be servicing us. Okay. I always tell people, tell a young person something, not when they're in trouble. Just because you see a young person, don't take any wooden nickels, save your money, just because you have the privilege of being your own.
Let's because we got about 8 minutes left on the show tonight. It don't take long, but that's why I said we're gonna have to do this in segments, okay? But
I'm invited back.
Oh, next week, hopefully, if you're available. But listen, we'll talk. But listen, but this last 5 or 6 minutes, what I want you to do is because I know we're beyond No Child Left Behind. But whenever you plant a seed, the seed usually yields fruit. What is the fruit of No Child Left Behind? Through your tenure in teaching, because you see where we were, you see where we are.
Well, No Child Left Behind forced us to teach to a test, and so I guess being in education, I've had mixed feelings about it. But everything you do, there's a test. When you said to become an insurance agent, you had to take a test. A doctor has to take a test.
Real estate exam.
Everything you do is testing. So I think we have to get that. We've always tested. Mm-hmm. Okay. By making the emphasis on reading and math, what we have done is we have killed our scientists. Okay. We have children who don't really understand geography because we spend so much time on reading and math. And really, reading and math is just that the literature that someone who is smarter than us thought was the best literature to use with our kids. Do we have to make sure our reading and our math scores are up? Yes. I will say one of my strengths is closing gaps with kids with reading and math. I have a
oh, what?
You like when that goes up, right?
I do. Hello, intellectual student James speaking.
Hi, James. This is Letty again.
All right, cool.
I'm sorry. I thought I'd listened to the response offline, so okay. I apologize for that.
No problem. We're going to participate in the conversation. We got a few minutes left, and she's going to answer a question, but we're talking about No Child Left Behind, and you can kind of share your experience with that as well, what the fruit has become. But I'm going to let Ms. Kanika talk. Go ahead, Ms. Kanika.
First, Ms. Letty, I want to make sure I answered your question. Since you were offline, were you able to hear my response to that one?
Yes, I heard part of it. And the reason I brought it up is just today I had a student who did not perform well in remote learning last year. But I had done a survey with him, and I already knew that he was a social, his intellect lied in the social area, social and interpersonal. Mm-hmm. So today when we were in the community circle, this child who had a low GPA last year, he did not do well with the whole year long of remote learning. He shined in class today in that setting with all of his peers.
Now, is he a special
and
education
he-
student, may I ask?
No, he isn't. He's
Okay.
not a special. No, he's not a special education student. He's in my homeroom.
Okay. And what do you
However, I
think
am
was
a
different
special
in the,
education teacher.
oh, you are? Okay, okay. What was the environment when you said he shined in the environment? What do you think was unique to that environment?
Being with his peers in the social setting.
Back in class, right? You're
That
saying?
was back inside the classroom in school.
I'm glad you mentioned
Yeah.
that because I think that a lot of, I was thinking about this earlier. When we left, at least where I lived, in March of 2020, when schools closed, and then students went back, we attempted to have them come back in September. They had been out of school for 6 months. And then last year was really rigid. They had times where they were in and times that they were out. So with time's sake, one of the things I would want to say to a parent is, there are going to be some gaps that those students have in their learning. That's the reason why I say to take some accountability. You have to teach your children at home too. I know for a fact that I had 8th graders that went to high school that were not ready for high school. I had students who did not log in 4% of the time, so they missed an 8th. I was a 7th and 8th grade teacher. 8th grade is a very, that 8th grade math is a foundation for algebra if they're not in algebra, so it's a very critical time. And so for me, it was heartbreaking because I'm thinking about where those kids are. Parents that turn to their kids and say, you had a child in 7th grade, beginning of 7th grade of 2020, who was a strong student, or 8th grade or 10th grade, and you're going to see some changes in them. Don't beat the baby. Look back at yourself, because again, if we only depend on the school to educate our kids, then those gaps will be there.
Gotcha.
We have a role. Do recognize that it's going to be an adjustment. What she is describing as far as being a social setting, at that age group, their peers are everything to them. And so trying to have kids, like, even I'm looking at myself on here. I did a lot of teaching, and sometimes it makes me uncomfortable just seeing myself. Not every child is comfortable with that type of format. So when you are preparing your kids, I know school has returned back in, and Miss Letty, I want to say I'm glad that you had such a success with your student, and I pray just for you being a fellow educator that your year is also successful. And also,
Thank you.
You're welcome, darling. Also, gear up your parents for that. Parents, it's going to take that village now, especially for our future, for our kids. But if there was ever a more pressing time, the days of you went to school and the teacher's going to tell you about your kids, you have to throw it out the window. You have to make demands on your district. You have to be that parent that is there and they don't want to see you coming again, because that's the only way your kid's going to get the quality care that they really need. You have a job and responsibility to raise your children. It's your job. God gives them to you on loan. And so it takes more than just having their clothes and the food and sending them there. And please don't wait for a report card to see how your child is doing.
Gotcha.
Okay? That's what I would add.
All right, Miss Letty, thank you for calling. Let me ask you, what grade did you say the young man was in?
Ninth grade was his first year last year in ninth grade.
Okay.
And now he's in 10th grade.
Okay.
And then he and I had a conversation last year, about what his needs were. And that's so important that Ms. Blooms is saying, find out how your child learns best. That's one piece of advice that's, it's very, for parents to prioritize that. How does your child learn best? And then secondly, make sure that your teachers are meeting that need so
Okay.
your child can be successful.
We appreciate you for calling. Listen, we're going to be continuing this conversation next Wednesday at the same time, so please tune in. If you know any other educators that can help add to this conversation, let's keep the conversation going. And thank you for calling, Ms. Letty.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
I enjoyed everything. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a good night. Hey, well, it's
We did an hour.
we did an hour.
We made it.
Time is up.
I want to thank you again for just having. I've been full of these things that just as a parent, making a career in teaching, thinking of segueing out of teaching. I've been full for a long time. I have a lot of passion towards this, and I do want to just thank you for giving. I think it's an important conversation for everyone, parent or no. But I just want to thank you for giving me a platform to have these type of conversations. And I pray that it's a blessing onto someone's life and that we can change the world.
You're blessing me, and we're just scratching the surface. We go next week. I want to kind of get into some more of the dynamics in the classroom.
Okay.
It's good that
Give me homework.
Miss Letty called in. You can go ahead and start taking us out, Disco. But it's great that Miss Letty called in and she shared that success story.
Yes.
I hope that she shared it with his parents as well, and with him, because I'm sure that they say affirmation is oxygen for the soul.
Say that again.
Affirmation is like oxygen for the soul. Listen, we've enjoyed ourselves tonight. Hope you've enjoyed the Intellectual Stew. If you are listening to this conversation, please feel free to share it, like it, comment. Go to the website, theintellectualstew.com. Want a t-shirt, want to order a t-shirt, go there. They are available, and I will get it to you ASAP. Listen, thank you so much for calling in. Remember, we're on the path, tuning in, I'm sorry. Remember, we're on the path to better. And I got one more question for you. The world is changing. Why do you remain the same?